The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to All You Can Eat. It is the podcast about deliciousness. I'm your host, Rod Rosenthal, coming to you here with episode number 77 from New York. However, this evening, it's a little bit different. Rather than coming to you from New York City, New York, I have managed in these complex times to escape, and I am 100 miles away in another part of New York that just feels slightly, I don't know, safer, if you will. Anyway, tonight's show is slightly different from what it is that you might be accustomed to, because when I talk about deliciousness, generally it's in terms of things that we consume, that we eat, that we make, places that we go that can be delicious. Tonight's show is different in the sense that it's going to be about 60 celebrities that I've met that I can remember meeting in my lifetime. The origin of that idea is very simply that I saw on the Facebook this kind of game that people were playing. I've been on that thing for a long time. I'm not one of those game guys that. So I didn't actually join into the game, which I believe was name 5 or 6 celebrities that you've met, one of whom is a lie, and then people are supposed to guess the lie. I didn't play the game, but it occurred to me when I started thinking about the celebrities that I knew, it was well more than 6. In fact, I've compiled a list of 60 celebrities that I can recall having met in my lifetime, varying degrees of celebrity. You know what I mean? Some of them from sports, some of them from music and theater and television and comedy, and obviously a whole bunch of them from the area of food. Of course, some more famous than others. But I thought it would be fun to kind of remind myself by telling you the story about the celebrities that I have met. And I can give you a brief kind of context for each one. But here is the list of 60 celebrities that I can recall having met. So I'll try to get through as many of these as I can, at least for tonight's show. Willis Reed, Muhammad Ali, Kenny Loggins, Charlie Daniels, James Taylor, Jackson Browne, and Harry Reams. Just a quick reminder there for those of you who don't know, there was a very famous porn movie called Deep Throat, the star of which was Harry Reams. In music, let's see, Luther Vandross. Oh, I already mentioned Kenny Loggins, James Taylor, Charlie Daniels, Jackson Browne, but there's also Luther Vandross. And here's a whole bunch of people that I have met during my time in the advertising business when we were, creating and producing commercials. Tony Randall and Jack Klugman, the odd couple. Alan Arkin, who you can see now in that HBO, I knew I would forget the name, but that HBO series that he's doing with Michael Douglas. The sports star, Pele, Jackie Joyner Kersee, gold medal winner, Dave Winfield, Yankees. And back into music and theater and showbiz, Peter Ustinov, Victor Borga, Stockard Channing, Gene Siskel, Roger Ebert, Bob Costas, Billy Porter, Joel Grey, Jim Gaffigan, Caroline Ray, and Ruben Blades. And in the area of food, we've got Jacques Pepin, Emeril Lagasse, Giada De Laurentiis, Bobby Flay, Michael Simon, Mario Batali, Carla Hall, Ming Tsai, Rick Bayless, Wolfgang Puck, Tom Colicchio, Daniel Boulud, Wiley Dufresne, Marcus Samuelson, Floyd Cardoz. Oh, that's sad right there, since I reported on Floyd 2 episodes ago. He was a good guy, and anyway, he passed away just a couple of weeks ago from the COVID-19. Adam Richman, Graham Kerr, the Galloping Gourmet. I should just throw in right here, talking about my idol. Graham Kerr, Ferran Adria, Andrew Zimmern, Jose Andres, Eric Ripert, Gail Simmons, Rene Redzepi, one of the great worldwide chefs in the world, Alex Guarnaschelli, Duff Goldman, the baking guy, Rocco DeSpirito, Harold McGee, Jean-Georges Vangeristen, and then some others that fall into other areas, Gary Vaynerchuk, Jamie Lynn Siegler, she played Meadow on The Sopranos, Michael Bloomberg, ex-presidential candidate, ex-mayor of New York City, Steve Madden, the man behind the shoes, Chris Matthews, Chuck Scarborough, and John Rowland from the world of TV broadcasting. Now, let's see, what's the best order? I do, as a further introduction to this, say that some of these people I interviewed, others I literally, shared a meal with. Some of the encounters were super brief, 10 minutes, whatever, or hello, how are you, or something. Others I actually vacationed with. Got in a hot tub with a couple of these people, naked, and smoked a joint with another one. So, from the fields of food and sport, TV, music, and some of these people super lovely, and some maybe not so much. Here are the people that I have met, and a brief story about them. And I think this is, looks to me like, I put together this list, of course, but it looks to me like it's in some semi kind of order. Willis Reed played center for the New York Knicks. And the long story short about Willis, who I only met because I attended like a 2-week or a 1-week basketball camp called the Willis Reed Basketball Camp. And, in addition to, what you pay to go and play basketball with a celebrity, you do end up taking home the picture of you and Willis. So there's some picture of me at, I don't know, must be 15, 16 years old, standing next to the 6'9" Willis Reed, a hero in the history of New York sports, because in 1969, injured, out, I think, in Game 6 of the 7-game championship against the Los Angeles Lakers, Willis came back in Game 7 to a packed Madison Square Garden that just erupted when they saw him limp out onto the floor, and the Knicks won what is, I guess that was one of the greatest years in New York sports history, because you had 1969. Knicks won the championship in 7 games over the Lakers. I mean, I can't tell you how, awesome that was. And it was also the same year the Mets won a World Series. Wow, 1969. Quick shot with Willis Reed. Over in college at the Lehigh University, I had a number of, I don't know, would you call them jobs? Or I guess they weren't jobs, they weren't paid, but they were positions, and they involved entertainment. I was at some point literally the president of the Student Activities Council, so there was no government involved. This was strictly about, like, what movies are we going to bring in for people to see? What concerts are we going to bring in for people to hear? And then what speakers will we bring in for people to, listen to as well in person? And so I had learned that that there was a woman on campus, one of the students. I was in charge of bringing in the lecturers at that point, people that we were going to have as lecturers. And someone had said to me, hey, Patty Seidenberger. Now, the only reason I knew Patty Seidenberger was because she was blonde and perfect and stunning. I mean, she was a 10 as far as I was concerned at that point. The only reason I knew her. I would be petrified to go anywhere near her. But that said, someone said to me, hey, Patty Seidenberg knows Muhammad Ali. Her father or her uncle might be his, business manager, whatever. So anyway, I do, it gave me an excuse to find Patty Seidenberger. And long story short, we got Muhammad Ali to come speak at Lehigh University. The biggest venue that we had was Grace Hall. It was where the basketball team played and where the wrestling team wrestled. And you could fit 3,500 people in there. And so we were able to announce that we had Muhammad Ali. And people came from all over. There were more than 3,500, so that place was standing room only. And what I recall was that he had pulled up and parked right in front. I mean, no cars ever parked in front of Grace Hall. It just wasn't a thing. But Muhammad Ali obviously could do that, especially because he pulled up with like some silver shadow. I mean, some fancy, I don't remember the exact thing. But man, I mean, this was like the most expensive car that anybody had ever seen. And he was escorted into the back with me because my job, thankfully, was going to be to introduce Muhammad Ali to this standing room only crowd in Grace Hall of, I don't know, at this point there's got to be 3,700 people in there, as many as the fire department would let in because it was Muhammad Ali. And he came into the back room and, hi, shook hands, how you doing, Rob, Muhammad Ali, I'm going to go out and introduce him. And so I can only tell you from the encounter that I was able to come away with, I guess somebody else was there because this is everybody walking around with their own phone in their pocket. I was lucky because somebody was there to take a photo, which I have somewhere, of me and Ali. And the thing that's notable about the photo, not the fact that I had long, very blonde, full head of hair, but it was that he looked like he was half sleeping. I mean, literally the guy was like his eyes are half shut in the picture next to me. And all I can recall also is that they said, he can give one of six. This was very impressive, by the way. Muhammad Ali, they said, when you should know, he gives 6 different 15-minute presentations. Which one would you like it to be? One is on, X subject. One is on another. I don't remember the subjects from them. I just remember we chose the 15-minute subject that he was going to come out and talk about. And he didn't bring any notes. He didn't bring any slides. That 15-minute subject that he was going to deliver was all inside his head, completely memorized, every word of it. And we walked out together, and people just went bananas. I mean, I had never heard that kind of noise in the hall before. And I have been in that hall. I have been in there for basketball and for wrestling matches because, honestly, part of my job was to even announce those games. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Lehigh University's Grace Hall for tonight's contest between the Leopards of Lafayette and your own, the Lehigh Engineers. Anyway, so I walk out with Ali, 3,700 people screaming, and literally I went up to the microphone and I said, thank you, which I don't know, for some reason struck some as being funny. And then I said something as simple as float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, ladies and gentlemen, Muhammad Ali. He comes out and does his 15 at least minutes memorized, full of energy, not the half-sleeping Ali that I had been with just moments before, and gets the standing ovation. And eventually, I think there might have even been a couple of questions and answers, which is great. And because, these guys are like, talk about a counterpuncher, man, so you ask Ali a question, you better be prepared. He was the greatest in the world at that, at interacting with Howard Cosell, with Joe Frick, with whoever. Man was a freaking genius, aside from everything else. And anyway, walked out to his car, and I'm sad to report that one of the hubcaps on his, $100,000 car at that time was missing, never to be found. Muhammad Ali. I was at some point involved in, because of the student council thing, in the music, meaning the performance that we were going to have at the school. And at the same time, this should not come as a huge surprise, I had a radio show and there on the college radio station. And also I think I wrote some articles periodically for the Brown and White, the Lehigh University student newspaper. So when Kenny Loggins came to perform, I had access to him backstage. And so after the performance, I would go back and interview him so that I could, write like an article for the college newspaper. And one of the questions that I asked Loggins, he looked at me and he said, well, that's a very esoteric question. And he didn't answer it. And so I had to skip on to whatever other question there was. And I realized at the time I had no idea what that even meant, esoteric. Whatever I asked him apparently was too esoteric, airy-fairy, I don't know, somewhere ephemeral, I don't know, somewhere out there that did not warrant an answer. And he didn't give it to me. But the rest of the interview was fine, and I wrote the article. And then here's the part of the Kenny, I don't want to say that I felt like dissed. I just do, the one thing I remember from meeting with him is, well, that's a very esoteric question. And I remembered it so well that about 40 years later, and I'm going back now like 5 years ago, right? However many years ago, 40 years later, Kenny Loggins shows up again. This time, at a what can best be described as kind of an outdoor private party that features, well, in this case, Kenny Loggins. And I'm at the party, and Kenny Loggins is there. And so I go up to Loggins and I go, "Hey, I just want to tell you this story. I said, like, it must have been like 40 years ago. I interviewed you for an article I was writing for the college newspaper, and I asked you a question, and you looked at me and you said, well, that's a very esoteric question." And Loggins now looks at me 40 years later and says, "What was the question?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, that would have been a much better story." I mean, literally dissed me for what I feel now is the second time, 40 years later. Would have been a better story. And he's right. I just don't know what the question was. Who else did I meet back there? I met Charlie Daniels. South's going to do it again. Charlie Daniels, great, lovely guy. The lady's name on his guitar, don't remember, maybe like Lucy or something like that. Turns out to be his wife, and he was charming and lovely, Charlie Daniels. I met Jackson Browne backstage too after a Lehigh concert, and what was notable about that was that a friend of mine, Patty, said to me, I mean, he's my favorite artist in the world. It's always been a dream of mine to actually meet him. I said, well, I can bring you back with me, and you'll meet him. And we go backstage and see James, and there's Patty, and Patty said, it's been my lifelong dream to meet you. And he said, well, now you have, you can go kill yourself. That was Jackson Browne, a dick. And I suppose I wasn't surprised all the years later that it turns out he also beat his girlfriend, Daryl Hannah. I suppose the most memorable meeting I had at school was the one that I had with Harry Reams. The movie was called Deep Throat. It was, at the time, and maybe even now, one of the most famous, well-known porn movies in the world, because it was when people started getting crazy. When I say crazy, I mean it was it was a time back then that was different, and porn wasn't available everywhere that you could push a button on the internet. And the thing that was famous about Deep Throat, not Harry Reams, maybe Linda Lovelace to some extent, was that it was super popular as a movie, and the government really went after porn at that point. So Reams, who was the male star of the movie, had already been, arrested, sued for interstate, trafficking in interstate pornography. And they were just after this guy. And, part of what you do when you need to, make money to pay for lawyers is he went out on the college circuit as a speaker. Now, this was perfect for me because in my role as entertainment chairman, I had already chosen the 13 movies that we were going to play that semester, and some of them were, classics. I mean, it could have been like I don't remember what the classics were in that year, but famous, good, solid, Saturday Night Fever, whatever it was, type of movies, the kind of thing that would appeal to college students. And then for the 13th movie in the cycle, like the last movie of the season, I chose Deep Throat, which was a big deal because this was still a fairly conservative time at a conservative university, and the administration was not happy. And so they all went on record, including kind of like the religious community and some of the alumni and some of the administration, we don't want this movie, we don't want this movie. But they didn't ever actually prevent us, preclude us, block us in any way from showing it. So all they really did from, my perspective, is brought more attention to it. That we were going to have this movie playing over a weekend in December. Deep Throat. But they were not happy. There were articles in the student newspaper. How can we? Alumni are going to, alumni were threatening to pull money. And, money gets involved and crazy things happen. But I see that on the potential speaker list, is Harry Reams, who was the star of the movie. So I book Harry Reams for that very same weekend. I guess my first stroke of marketing lightning, because it's like that's what they call synergy. Like one is good and the other one is good, but 1 + 1 is 3. I got a weekend now with Deep Throat playing for the students, and Harry Reams going to come speak. So my job again, as I'm now responsible for kind of lectures. I'm going to introduce him to the crowd. We don't do the 3,500. This is 1,000. It's an 800-seat auditorium, but there's 1,000 people show up to see Harry Reams. I take him out to dinner, however, Widow Brown's or whatever that place was out there somewhere in Bethlehem or Allentown, or whatever that was. I take him out to dinner, and he makes a point of saying to me, Rob, do me a favor. How are you going to introduce me? I said, don't worry, I got it worked out. And he said, well, whatever you do, don't say something stupid and crass, like this guy's got a big whatever, or, playing with his sword, and, just don't do anything like that. That's just not going to. I said, don't worry, I got it all worked out. And so we drive from dinner, because it's, now we're going to go to the theater. It's a nighttime gig. I think we got him up there at like 7 o'clock, whatever it is. And I walk into the audience. We got, capacity things. And I said, look, ladies and gentlemen, I know there's been a lot of uproar on the campus community about the movie that we're showing this weekend. And I understand it. And further to that, there's even been a discussion about, having our guest this evening here as well. But one thing I can tell you for sure, this is a movie that he worked very hard on. And so, honestly, it was one of my first on-stage jokes. It went over very, very well, including with him, by the way. He was very, very good. He wasn't expecting that. I said, hey, let's not take it out on Harry Reams. This is a movie that he worked very hard on. And so there you go, ladies and gentlemen, Harry Reams. Oh, and I know that he was not unpleased, because after his presentation, which was great, smart. He's a lovely guy. He was like a regular guy from Westchester, New York. You wouldn't really pick him out of a crowd, I think. But he was he was physically gifted. Let us just say that. I'm not saying he was the finest actor, but he had what you needed for the role, if you will. And then after he did his presentation, I said, hey, it's whatever. It's Friday night here on campus. We got 31 fraternities. There's going to be a half a dozen parties, and all I think he heard me say was parties, and I think he ended up saying like women, like girl. I said, oh yeah, and so I said, you want to come? He said, yeah, sure. And so, it was in those days in college, there was pot. There was just weed, and there was this thing that I recall, which was pretty cool. It was like a the kind of bottles, plastic bottles that you would, that people, that runners or bikers drink out of, like you squeeze the bottle and the water comes out. So there was one of these things that held a lit joint in it, so that when you squeeze the bottle, the smoke came out of the top of the bottle. And that's what it is that we use to smoke pot and to go to, 3 or 4 fraternity parties to watch Harry hit on the few girls that we had on campus. Because in those days, not only was it was conservative, it was dominated. I think it was like 85% guys at that point, 15% women. But that was my time with Harry Reams. I'm only going to throw in the quick James Taylor here, because it wasn't from that era. It was a little bit after, but I ended up on a vacation at a spa. And in that spa, I befriended a guy named Gene Siskel, who I'll get to later. Anybody old enough to remember Two Thumbs Up was Siskel and Ebert at the movies, a very, very super popular, dominant, actually, television show doing weekly movie reviews. Anyway, Gene and I were at the spa together, where we became friends, and we got into a jacuzzi hot tub in which was sitting James Taylor. That's the extent of my interaction, really, with James Taylor, not with Siskel. We'll come back to him later. But James Taylor and I did take a jacuzzi together, and he, at some point, got up and Oh, wow, I forgot to put O.J. Simpson on the list. Oh, wow. Oh, I may just do that right now. Yeah, so that was my thing with James Taylor, who did get up, and naked and leave the pool. And that's what reminded me, I guess, of O.J. Simpson. Because at some point, I'm going to say late 80s, I found myself at another lovely resort out there in Laguna, the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel Beach. And what I remember, I took a run on the beach, and you know who was running on that beach, or running, or walking, or whatever they were doing, was Oprah Winfrey and Herb Stedman on the thing. I'm not counting that as a meeting. That's not. I just saw them on the beach. But I came into the locker room, and who was standing in the locker room right prior to I'm going to go get a massage. It was such a great massage. I actually remember the guy's name was Tony, was the masseuse at the time. But I walk into the locker room, and who's standing in the locker room with a towel around his waist? But O.J. Simpson, and he at that point, late 80s, he was still in serious shape. O.J. was in a series of commercial. I think it was Hertz, like rental car, like running through the airport. This guy was in shape. Like you could see. Looking at him, towel around his waist, he was beautiful. He was so beautiful that I think to myself, wow, I mean, if I came back in my next life, this guy's got it pretty good. I mean, he's beautiful. He's a football star. He's got millions of bucks. You know what I mean? Well, at which point, by the way, and I won't go into the kind of detail that some of you, the more perverted of you, would be interested in, but he did take off the towel and get on the scale, and he weighed himself. And I can tell you exactly what he weighed, because I got on the scale right after him. He was 211 pounds. He was 6'1", 211, and that was my meeting with O.J. Simpson. Luther Vandross. Yeah, so then I got into and I don't want to, come back in the next life, obviously, any longer as O.J. Simpson. But at that moment, man, that was a beautiful, perfect human being. Luther Vandross. Yeah, well, after the college, I got into the advertising business, which was good. I mean, good in terms of it was certainly interesting and fun. And I worked on, the first thing I ever worked on was Pabst Blue Ribbon, a television account. And we were doing a new campaign, and we were recording voices and radio commercials. And we got this guy in. When I say we, whoever was producing the commercial at that point, got a guy in to sing the new Pabst Blue Ribbon song for us. The guy's name happened to have been Luther Vandross. Not very well known at that point. Subsequent to that, became super well known and a wonderful soul singer, and also, that kind of sexy R&B soul singer that, women go to that concert, they would be throwing their panties up on the stage for Luther Vandross. But at this point, just a charming young guy singing a couple of commercials for Pabst Blue Ribbon. Worked on at some point, I don't know if you guys remember this, the airplanes. Remember the days of the airplane? Like you get on an airplane, they used to hand out little bags of peanuts, and specifically Eagle honey roast peanuts. Remember those little things, like a half an ounce of those beautiful little honey roast peanuts? Well, those peanuts were owned by Eagle, which was owned by Anheuser-Busch, and it was an account of mine. So we produced television commercials for Eagle Snacks, and the television commercials featured Tony Randall and Jack Klugman, the odd couple. And, the strategy was, well, this is perfect because, Eagle Snacks, on the one hand, they're snacks, so they're for every man, Jack Klugman. And on the other hand, they're perfect and they're crisp and, you have to eat them delicately. So you got Tony Randall. So conceptually, it was great. And these guys, I mean, it was, we did these things for years. I mean, I ended up knowing these guys, Jack Klugman and Tony Randall, very well. Even had a moment with Tony when Jack was kind of out sick. He ended up getting throat cancer at some point during this thing, so he couldn't record at that moment. And I was doing a thing with Tony in a conference room where we were rehearsing commercials for when Jack got back together. I played Jack, obviously, because Tony was going to play Tony. And they were so much who their characters were. It's almost like they weren't. It was almost like they weren't acting. I mean, Klugman was that guy, and Tony was the other guy. I mean, somebody lit up a cigarette on the set. He went, he just went bananas. But super talented, smart, lovely. And Tony lived in New York City, so that's why we were able to. He walked over to the office one day for us to do a run-through on this commercial he would eventually do with Jack. And we ended up having a lunch with a bunch of us to kind of brainstorm. And I had lunch ordered. I'd ordered in lunch from this fancy place up on Madison Avenue. I think it was called Eat, E-A-T, like it was Eli Zabar type of thing. I ordered in. I remember the lunch was ended up being like $400 or $500. It's like 10 of us, but very expensive place. Best stuff. And there's going to be cold cuts and sandwiches and salads, maybe some soup, a variety of breads, crackers, cheeses, grapes, dessert, the whole thing. And 35 minutes into the brainstorm / luncheon, Tony starts putting his hand to his face, to his lips. And he just stops, like everybody stops to see, because he looks like he's going to say something important. And he says, "Are there any sesame seeds in this bread?" Well, I mean, I know instantly that there are, because I ordered the sesame semolina. I mean, it's a great bread, like an Italian kind of, like loafy, curvy, beautiful bread with sesame seeds on it, and he gets up and he goes, "I have to go to the hospital now before I go into anaphylactic shock." "Don't worry, I'll walk there," he says. I mean, like, we're in Midtown New York. I don't mean to be laughing, but Tony, should we get an ambulance, right? A taxi? Walk you over? No. I'll go walk over there right now. So he went to go walk over to the hospital because I guess I had fed him sesame seeds, which he's entirely allergic to. Tony Randall. Met Alan Arkin too, by the way. Brilliant dude. He was directing the first set of commercials that we did with Tony and Jack. That was the experience there. And met in my time as well in the advertising business some other people. I thought, you could argue Muhammad Ali, one of the most famous athletes in the world, but I also have a lovely photograph having met Pelé. Pelé, the great soccer star from Brazil. Didn't spend a lot of time chit-chatting with him, but met him, sweet, shook the hand, took the photo that I will always cherish, because I would say Pelé and, Muhammad Ali, that's two very big ones. Had lunch with Jackie Joyner-Kersee, who had just won, prior to that, a gold medal for the United States in a track and field event. All I can remember, since I was working on Evian water at the time, was that the issue of hydration surfaced, and Jackie mentioned in the middle of lunch that you're dehydrated when your pee is too yellow. And I know that she was right, and I know she didn't mean anything by it, but somehow I lost just a touch of my appetite at the moment. It's unusual for me. I met Dave Winfield, and that was real brief, but I was invited to some gathering, probably by Sports Illustrated. It was his first night in town as a Yankee, and so they were going to introduce him to a crowd of people, including advertising people. That's why I was there, and I went up to him. And I said, "I know it's your first night in town. I don't know if you know anybody, but if you want, I can, take you with dinner." And he was super appreciative, and we did not have dinner together. I met Peter Ustinov. So you got to be not young to know who that guy was, but brilliant as an actor, as a director, a raconteur, a talent. So talented, in fact, we recorded radio commercials with this guy, and we chatted about some things. Oh, because I was working at the time on Carlsberg beer, and Ustinov was going to be our voice guy on the commercials. He was great, and we recorded in London. Stayed at one of those, I don't know, Browns or Claridge's. That was the fanciest hotel I'd ever been to at that point in my life. And we were talking about things Danish and Carlsberg. And while we were sitting there doing commercials, recording commercials, and I think I was actually the one. I don't think a producer could go for whatever reason. I don't know if it was him or Borga, but very involved. And he started sketching, and his sketches looked like the kind that you would see in a published in a newspaper. I mean, just anyway, brilliant guy in a lot of ways, super talented. And I do mention also that for Carlsberg, we hired Victor Borge. And anybody who's watched public television in the last, 20 years, sometimes you see Victor Borge come on, Danish, hilarious, brilliant pianist, comedian. It's like nobody else who ever did that thing. And we hired him for exactly $50,000 to record some Carlsberg commercials for us. Why am I laughing? Because I am from America. Anheuser-Busch had the rights to distribute and therefore market and pay for these commercials. So they approved Victor Borge at our recommendation. And Borge comes into the radio studio and we start recording commercials. And he says something, whatever the line was, ending with Carlsberg. Okay, Victor, it's going to be Carlsberg. And so he records again and ends with Carlsberg. All I could tell you was, however many hours, the 2 or 3 hours that we recorded radio commercials, never once did Victor Borge actually say Carlsberg. And so I have $50,000 now down the toilet because Victor Borge could only say Carlsberg. And they weren't paying for that. Celebrities. So, yeah, there's more. Stockard Channing didn't spend a lot of time chit-chatting with her, but went on a hike together when I was out there at that spa in Arizona, which is also where I befriended a guy named Gene Siskel. And for anybody that doesn't know, Siskel and Ebert was a giant television show at the time on public television, on channel, on syndicated. He and Siskel and Ebert would review 3 or 4 movies per show, and if they liked it, it would get a thumb up. If they didn't, it would be a thumb down. But the nature of the show was that they argued with each other. I mean, they really agreed, and it was fantastic television. It was the most popular show at its time, and Ebert was a celebrity in his own right. These guys wrote for the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. Both, I mean, super smart and talented. And Ebert was a guy at the time, before he was married, that you could see showing up at the Playboy Mansion, because that was Chicago-based. It was Hefner. So Ebert was Siskel was a celebrity there in that town, as was Ebert. But Gene is the guy that I got friendly with. We got friendly with when he and his wife were vacationing at the same resort, Canyon Ranch, in Tucson, Arizona, that I was with my wife. We ended up befriending them to the point where, honestly, we went on vacations there at the same time. We stayed at their place, their home, a beautiful apartment home in Chicago. Went to restaurants together in New York. Gene, when he would come to New York, would call and say, "Hey, you want to come to this, this screening?" Sure. And I would go to a screening with Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. And then after would be like, "Hey, let's go out to lunch." And we'd go out to lunch, and I'll tell you something, or dinner, whatever it was. It was tense the whole time. They really didn't get along. They didn't like each other. They were both like intensely intelligent and super competitive, and it was always uncomfortable to be with the two of them. Because I had a friend there. It was hard to remain neutral, even though, anyway. Siskel died. I think Gene was like 50 from a brain thing, and super sad. Loved his wife, loved him. He had 3 daughters. He was really super smart and died way too young. Yeah, he was great, Gene. And one time we had a lunch together. I remember the restaurant on East 60th. I don't remember the restaurant because I was the one who was picking restaurants at the time. And we went out, Gene and I and a woman who worked for me, Stacy Fryer, we went out to lunch with Bob Costas, who at that point, was still, the guy, the go-to guy in, baseball sports announcing. So met him there as well. Yeah, I mean, there's more Siskel stories. I mean, we went to the track together because he was a handicapper. He played a crazy trick on my wife and I at the time because he was a joker. I mean, he was just a different Yale-educated guy. But one time we're going to meet for dinner at some Russian restaurant in the theater district. And we pull in right on time, my wife and I, to this Russian restaurant, and we go up and we check in, and the maitre d' or whoever the hostess said, "Oh, here's a note for you," and the note says, "Listen, we were just invited to a dinner with Madonna and Sean Penn, who were married at the time." And so if you, and so the next line was, so, if you want to come meet us, here's where we're going to be. And I don't have to tell you that my wife and I didn't look at each other. We didn't discuss. We just immediately stood up and walked right out the door, like with our arms raised to hail a cab. And there across the street, of course, is Gene and his wife just laughing their asses off because, of course, they were not invited to that dinner, and neither were we. And so just the four of us had dinner together at the Russian restaurant. There is a little something for you about Gene Siskel. Funny guy. And now, for the last bunch of these, no, not the last bunch, but I'll just keep going. I met, these are not in any kind of order, but I did meet Billy Porter, who has now won 3 of the 4 awards. I think he's just short the Academy, which means he would have won an Oscar, a Tony, and an Emmy. Just super smart guy. But anyway, our mutual friend Aaron Walton, when we went to go see Billy, who was starring in the shoes, Kinky Boots on Broadway. The family and I were invited to go hang out with him backstage. Lovely guy. Lovely, super talented guy. I always feel slightly bad about the experience only because I remember it's one of those theaters where you could drink during the show, and who wouldn't want to have a drink or two during Kinky Boots? And I know that he's Billy Porter, but in my head, I had kept thinking to myself, Billy Taylor. And so when I went back, I actually inadvertently said, mistakenly, not even inadvertent, I mean, it's just, "Oh, hey, Billy Taylor, how are you?" And it wasn't Billy Taylor, it was Billy Porter. And he didn't bother to correct me. That's how lovely he was about the whole thing. We spent some time, we got the family photo, and God bless him. He's huge, even more huge now than he was then as a star of Kinky Boots. You watch him on the Oscars or the Tonys or whatever, he's a dominant talent. Joel Grey. Cabaret. Anyway, Joel Grey was at a 60th birthday party for a friend of mine, the great restaurateur Danny Meyer. Joel Grey is there as a guest, and I was having a chat with someone at one of the tall tables. You stand, one of those, round, you kind of standing tables. And up walks Joel Grey. And so the guy that I'm chatting with, who's kind of like a celebrity trainer, he's having a little chat with Joel Grey. And I couldn't help but say to Joel Grey, I just want you to know, and this is a true story, by the way, because, and he's Jennifer Grey's dad, father. Jennifer Grey, for those of you who don't know, the star, along with Patrick Swayze, of the movie Dirty Dancing. And people are always surprised to hear this because I don't think that you would imagine that this would be the case. I've seen Dirty Dancing more than any movie that I've seen, any movie in my entire life. Like, not 50 times, 60 maybe. So when Joel Grey came over, I was excited because I said, Joel, I just want you to know that I have watched Dirty Dancing more times than any movie that I've ever seen in my whole life, which I thought he might find lovely simply because it was his daughter. And he just walked away. He didn't even acknowledge it. He just literally heard that and shut down and walked away. And the celebrity trainer looks at me and he goes, he doesn't want to hear about anybody else if it's not about him. That's my Joel Grey story for you. Jim Gaffigan right now as a comedian is as popular, well-known, not only here in America, but worldwide, for his comedy as almost any other comedian out there. He's just huge right now. And I knew him from when he was an account executive at an advertising agency, Ogilvy and Mather, I believe it was. And I remember it because I was also in an advertising agency, but he had just started doing stand-up comedy, as had I. And in fact, so I was with Jim more than one time. And in fact, the very first night that I had ever performed stand-up in New York was at the Improv in the West 40s. And the room was packed. Literally, that room was filled to the rim. I want to say, well, however many people they had in the Improv. And we had a show there that evening. Showcase, whatever you want to call it. And I remember the room filled, and I remember looking out into the audience, and for some reason Mary Tyler Moore was there. I think she was a friend of one of the other comedians on that night's bill. And the MC that evening was a guy named Jim Gaffigan. I think it was his, I don't know, maybe second month or so, having done stand-up. And so Jim Gaffigan was the guy who brought me to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Rosenthal. So, and then we performed other times together, and he is now traveling around the world making millions of dollars as a stand-up comedian. Ruben Blades is as big as you get in the world of Latin music. I mean, a giant. I won't waste a ton of your time. You look up Ruben Blades online, Wikipedia, wherever you look. Enormous, famous album sales, Grammys, television, multi-talented, brilliant. And I know Ruben because my brother and Ruben's wife, Luba Mason, are tight BFF. Ruben Blades. Now, the rest of the people on my list at this point, I'm looking at that list, and there are a lot of food people. So I think what I'll do here is, rather than go into the food people, because I can see we're going to have to break this thing into two parts. Let me see what else happens if I tell you who else I met here along the way. Jamie Lynn Sigler. You'd only know her if you watch The Sopranos. She was Meadow. Met her for a few lovely minutes at the Aspen Food and Wine Festival. Interviewed her on camera. Very pretty. Very pretty. Mayor Mike Bloomberg, at least 3-time mayor of New York City and former presidential candidate. I went up to him after seeing him speak down at the brand new memorial to... I'm writing myself a note here because now that I think about where I met Bloomberg, it was down at the... They don't call them the Twin Towers. It's not the World Trade Center. It's the new building there. He gave a little presentation. I went up to him right afterwards just to shake his hands and say, "Hey, thank you for your service," because he was a pretty great mayor in my limited estimation. But I lived there. I should know. I mean, I voted for him. I don't care what party he was from. He was a good mayor from my perspective. Met him. Met Jamie Lynn Sigler. Met a couple of these. The note that I wrote to myself is. Philippe Petit, which I think I'm going to, just because I haven't really thought it all the way through, I think I'm going to wait on Philippe and tell you who else is on this list here. Steve Madden. You may know his shoes if you don't know the man. Graduated high school with Steve Madden. I actually saw him stopped by the police for the first time back on Long Island, right around the high school area. And then the news guys I met. Chris Matthews, who recently was kind of unceremoniously dumped from MSNBC. Met him, shook the hand, said, I want you to know that my kids and I love watching that thing you do at the end, like the last word, which of course he found completely insulting, since the last word is the name of Lawrence O'Donnell's show that follows his. Chuck Scarborough, the meeting with him was momentary and forgettable, but he was sitting at a bar. That's what I remember. And speaking of sitting at a bar, where I also once spotted the great Tim Russert, didn't meet him. I did meet the guy who was a longtime anchor on Channel 5 in New York, John Rowland. I met him also at that spa out in Arizona. And at the time he was going out with a pretty young woman who was a cardio aerobics type instructor. They were there on vacation. And he and I sat down with my wife and I, day 2 at Canyon Ranch, where they don't serve any alcohol. Because among other things, you're there to be just totally pure and clean. There was no alcohol. There was no, sugar in the house. It was whatever. And I could tell. I sat down and had dinner with these guys, John Rowland and his girlfriend. And he was like, we got to get out of here at some point. We got to go off campus so we can get a drink. You want to come with us? So, I don't know. Here's the thing. I was happy to be there and be like pure. But, going out to dinner with John and his girlfriend it seemed like a good idea. We went out, found some local steak joint, because all this guy wants is a martini and a steak, which he orders. I managed to not drink rare, but that's kind of the reason that you're there. And I have a small, healthy meal, but spent a meal with John Rowland so that he could have a martini or two here at the during his time at the spa. Let's see, where are we in this thing? I would say at this point there's too many people on that food list to go through in any kind of detail. But let's save that for the next episode of the food celebrities that I have met, interviewed, and otherwise maybe spent some time with. And I will remind you that those people will be everybody from the great Jacques Pepin, Emerald Lagasse, Gianna, Bobby Flay, Michael Simon, Mario Batali, Carla Hall, Ming Tsai, Rick Bayless out of Chicago, Wolfgang Puck, Tom Colicchio, you know him, he's the judge, Daniel Boulud and Wiley Dufresne, Marcus Samuelson, Floyd, I just see his name, I get sad, Floyd Cardos, Adam Richman, Graham Kerr, the Galloping Gourmet, love that dude, Ferran Adria, and John George, Van Gerichten, and Rene Redzepi, and Andrew Zimmern, and Jose Andres, fabulous. Eric Repair, Gail Simmons, Alex Guarnaschelli, Duff Goldman, Rocco DeSpirito, Harold McGee, the great food scientist and writer, and of course young Gary Vaynerchuk, super duper kind of popular everything at this point. So I think what we'll do is I'm going to say good night for this evening. I'm going to, before I do though, let's do just a quick commercial, because you're at home. Most of us are at this point, and we're doing a lot of cooking. And the long story short about cooking is, we have a tendency to make those things that we know and certainly are familiar with. But one of the problems is that you get into a rut and you keep having the same thing over and over again, and it gets tiring, and who needs all that? And sometimes you just need to add a little spice, a little flavor, a little something, a little zhuzh, a little excitement to a meal. And I'm going to tell you here right now, there is no better way to do that than to add spices, herbs to a dish. I will say now, as I've said before, as a guy who has written a cookbook called Short Order Dad, My goal has always been to get the most taste with the fewest ingredients and the least effort. And there's no better way to do that. There's no more effective way to do that, my friends, than to hit up, whether it's a vegetable or a potato or a piece of fish, chicken, shrimp, protein, whatever it is, pork chop, hit it up with some serious and different or not different spice, and then add heat, and magic ensues. And so I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm not open to the site, but the site that I'm going to refer to is the Spice House, which I like. Hey, I like Penzeys too, don't get me wrong, but Penzeys is basically, they're not doing shipping and delivery at this point. But the Spice House will still send out some spices to you in the mail, and if you play it right, you can get it. They're on a 4 or 5 week lag time, but if you play it right, they can go out faster because they have a thing called the flat pack, where instead of getting bottles of spices, they're sending it to you in little plastic bags that they can package flat, and so that mail goes out, a lot faster than the delivery does when it has like jars and bottles of spices and whatever. You can decide. The thing I like about the Spice House, when you go to their site and you begin to explore, you can see they break everything up by categories. Like, do you want this part of the world, or do you want it for, like for example, you want Mediterranean spices, you want Latin spices. You can break it that way. You can do it by category, including, these are the spicy ones, these are the everyday ones. You can break it by like cuisine, like, oh, these are the blends that you might consider having for, a barbecue or that kind of thing, or a braise, whatever it's going to be. So I like the Spice House. And here's what I'm going to give you also, people, that if you do end up buying anything from the Spice House, I can get you 15% discount on your order. And all you're doing is you're plugging into the promo code, the name of this show, All You Can Eat. One word, All You Can Eat. And if you're at the Spice House and you go to, continue to shopping and then continue to checkout, and make sure that in the promo code you write All You Can Eat, 15% comes off your order. So there you go. Wanted to just let you know that. And finally, as I said, you can find me, my friends, on Instagram. I'm throwing up pictures of what we're throwing up, I suppose is not a great food word, but I'm posting pictures of lovely foods and little videos that we've been making here during the corona sequestration. So you got that. I'm Real Rob Rosenthal on Instagram. If you're more of a Twitter type person, you can just look up Short Order Dad. I'm on there. A bunch of people over in that area. Not as visual, but, things that might be relevant. So I'm at Short Order Dad if you happen to be a Twitter person, or a Facebook. You can look up Short Order Dad on Facebook. I have a Facebook page there. Until next week, this is episode number 77 of All You Can Eat, my brush with celebrity, if you will. Remember, my friends, as you stay safe and stay home, life is short, so never waste a meal.
I'm the Teflon Pan Man.